Hello everyone, and welcome to Mr. Simplify's tutorials. In this tutorial, we're going to simplify the popular object relations theory by looking at key concepts, key contributors, and how the object relation theory is used in therapy. Sigmund Freud is acknowledged as the father of modern psychology and the founder of psychoanalysis. Now, Freud laid a lot of emphasis on the early years of a person's life to the person's personality development in later life. He proposed that human motivation is derived out of pleasure and out of sexual drives. Object relations theory branched out of Freud's psychodynamic theory and proposes that human beings are actually motivated by the need for contact with other people and the need to form relationships. The theory states that our psyche is developed based on our relationship with the objects around us in our infancy. Melanie Klein is regarded as one of the founders of the object relations theory, and the other major contributors include Ronald Fairbairn and Donald Winnicott. Now, let's look at some of the major concepts in the object relations theory. It's firstly important to understand what an object is in the object relations theory. In the object relation theory, an object doesn't refer to inanimate entities. It refers to people with whom the individual is associated with, like one's mother, father, or a caregiver. But in some cases, an object can also refer to a part of a person, like a mother's breasts. It can also refer to the mental representation of people. This is because infants are incapable of immediately recognizing people as people. They develop mental representations of people depending on their repeated interactions or experiences with them. It is important to note that infants also develop mental representations of themselves in relation to the people they interact with. These mental representations influence their interpersonal relationships as adults. Objects relations theory therefore lays a lot of emphasis on early family interactions, particularly the interactions between infants and their mothers. The objects relations theory is called so because it refers to the internalization of relationships between us and the significant objects in our lives. Now, the top three primary mental representations in the object relations theory are as follows. So the first representation is that of an object as perceived by the individual. The next representation is the individual's self-perception in relation to the object, and the third is the relationship between the individual and the object in question. Now, this will be clarified when we look at an example of these representations, and let's take the example of an infant's mother being considered to be the object. And these representations can be seen from the perspective of the infant. Now, the first representation is the mother is a good object as she feeds me when I'm hungry. Now, this is a positive representation of the object. Since she takes care of me, I must be worthy of being taken care of. This is a positive self-representation, and I love my mother. So this is a representation of a positive relationship. Such internal representations are formed during infancy through repeated interactions. An infant's limited cognitive ability leads to the formation of such mental representations. Now, a human being at infancy splits objects into good or bad objects at different times. This phenomenon is called splitting. For instance, a mother is a good mother if all of the infant's requirements are fulfilled, and bad when they aren't fulfilled. And a similar thing happens with the infant's self-perception. Now, when a child grows and its development is healthy, it leads to the evolution of such mental representations. If the mother is able to meet the needs of the child to a satisfactory level, not completely, then the child considers the mother to be a good enough mother and merges the good and the bad relations together to form a whole entity, which is the mother. This further leads to the child's perception of understanding that objects in its life are real people with real strengths and weaknesses and imperfections. Now, if a child's development isn't healthy, its mental representations could stop evolving and remain at a level where it only identifies objects and entities as either good or bad objects and nothing in between. And just like in the infancy stage, bad objects can create a lot of anxiety in the mind of the child. Now let's look at some contributors to object relations theory, and let's also then look at some more important concepts. Melanie Klein is often credited with founding the objects relations approach. Klein worked with young children and infants and focused her attention on the first few months of an infant's life as opposed to Freud's focus on the first few years. Klein proposed that infants are object-seeking beings rather than pleasure-seeking beings as proposed by Freud. Ronald Fairbairn was another major contributor to the objects relations approach and also agreed with Klein's approach of infants being object-driven. He viewed development as a gradual process wherein individuals go from complete dependence to a state of interdependency wherein they still depend on others but can also themselves be depended on. Donald Winnicott. Now, Winnicott emphasized that children be raised in a social environment wherein they develop a sense of independence but also understand that their caregivers will protect them from different forms of danger. All the above and some other contributors agreed with the importance of the mother-infant relationship to the development of a child. Now, these are some very interesting and important concepts and perspectives. Now, what we'll do is we'll look at another couple of concepts and then see how object relations theory can be used in therapy. Now, Klein proposed that for the first few months from birth, an infant is in a paranoid schizoid position. This stage of an infant's life is dominated by anxiety. Now, these anxieties can be caused by things like the fear of death, the trauma of birth itself, hunger, soiled pants, and bodily pains like teething. It is in this stage that splitting takes place as a defense mechanism, and the infant starts seeing the world as good or bad depending on its needs being met. The paranoid schizoid stage is essentially a stage of worrying too much about oneself. From approximately 6 months old, the infant moves towards the depressive position. This marks the start of a feeling of guilt arising from knowing that the good and bad objects could actually be one object. For instance, the good breast and the bad breast belong to the same mother. The infant starts to come to terms with the idea of imperfect whole objects rather than good and bad ones. These are some really important concepts in child development. Now let's look at the importance of the object relations theory in therapy. The object relations theory is a very important approach for the purpose of psychotherapy. As previously stated, children receiving improper care could develop problems and could stay in a paranoid schizoid position for longer. And adults in a paranoid schizoid position tend to worry too much about their own self and their own safety in any situation and will look at things as being good or being bad. People can also be in depressive positions, making them worry too much about the safety of the objects in their lives. Being in a depressive position also leads to excessive guilt, whereas being in a paranoid schizoid position leads to people being hostile towards other people. An object relations therapist will help people identify patterns in their lives that may be impacting their relationships with others. A person then begins to uncover the representations that they have about their early life caregivers and how these representations may have shaped the way they feel about themselves and their relationships with others at the present time. So, an object relations therapist can try and identify patterns in patients and try and understand if the person is more towards a paranoid schizoid position or a depressive position. If a therapist can help a client accept the part of themselves that they dislike, it could help a paranoid schizoid position move closer to a depressive position, or a depressive position move closer to a paranoid schizoid. As with most methods of therapy, it is important to maintain a close client-patient relationship for a gradual change in mindsets and behavior. So this is how an object relations therapy could work. So these are all of the concepts that we're going to look at in this tutorial. I hope this was beneficial for you. I thank you very much for your attendance to this tutorial, and as always, please like, share, subscribe, and please take very good care of your own self. Thank you. Bye-bye.